Chapter 11 of Elizabethan Dogs by William Wood. This recording is in the public domain. Chapter 11 Raleigh and the Vision of the West. Conquerors first, prospectors second, then the pioneers. That is the order of those by whom America was opened up for English-speaking people. No Elizabethan colonies took root. Therefore the age of Elizabethan sea-dogs was one of conquerors and prospectors, not one of pioneering colonists at all. Spain and Portugal alone founded 16th-century colonies that have had a continuous life from those days to our own. Virginia and New England, like New France, only began as permanent settlements after Drake and Queen Elizabeth were dead. Virginia in 1607, New France in 1608, New England in 1620. It is true that Drake and his sea-dogs were prospectors in their way. So were the soldiers, gentlemen adventurers, and fighting traders in theirs. On the other hand, some of the prospectors themselves belonged to the class of conquerors, while many would have gladly been the pioneers of permanent colonies. Nevertheless, the prospectors form a separate class, and Sir Walter Raleigh, though an adventurer in every other way as well, is undoubtedly their chief. His colonies failed. He never found his El Dorado. He died a ruined and neglected man, but still he was the chief of those whom we can only call prospectors, first because they tried their fortune ashore, one step beyond the conquering sea-dogs, and secondly because their fortune failed them just one step short of where the pioneering colonists began. A man so various that he seemed to be not one, but all mankind's epitome, is a description written about a very different character, but it is really much more appropriate to Sir Walter Raleigh. Courtier and would-be colonizer, soldier and sailor, statesman and scholar, poet and master of prose, Raleigh had one ruling passion greater than all the rest combined. In a letter about America to Sir Robert Cecil, the son of Queen Elizabeth's principal minister of state, Lord Burleigh, he expressed this great determined purpose of his life: "I shall yet live to see it an English nation." He had other interests in abundance, perhaps in superabundance, and he had much more than the usual temptations to live the life of fashion, with just enough of public duty to satisfy both the Queen and the very least that is implied by the motto Noblesse oblige. He was splendidly handsome and tall, a perfect blend of strength and grace, full of deep romantic interest in great things far and near, the very man whom women dote on. And yet, through all the seductions of the court and all the storm and stress of Europe, he steadily pursued the vision of that West which he would make an English nation. He left Oxford as an undergraduate to serve the Huguenots in France under Admiral Coligny and the Protestants in Holland under William of Orange. Like Hawkins and Drake, he hated Spain with all his heart, and paid off many a score against her by killing Spanish troops at Smerwick during an Irish campaign marked by ruthless slaughter on both sides. On his return to England he soon attracted the charmed attention of the Queen. His spreading his cloak for her to tread on, lest she might wet her feet, is one of those stories which ought to be true if it's not. In any case, he won the royal favor, was granted monopolies, promotion, and estates, and launched upon the full flood stream of fortune. He was not yet 30 when he obtained for his half-brother Sir Humphrey Gilbert, then a man of 38, a royal commission to inhabit and possess all remote and heathen lands not in the possession of any Christian prince. The draft of Gilbert's original prospectus, dated at London the 6th of November, 1577, and still kept there in the Record Office, is an appeal to Elizabeth, in which he proposed to discover and inhabit some strange place. Gilbert was a soldier and knew what fighting meant, so he likewise proposed to set forth certain ships of war to the new land, which, with your good licence, I will undertake without your Majesty's charge. The new land fish is a principal and rich and everywhere vendible merchandise, and by the gain thereof shipping, victual, munition, and the transporting of 5,000 or 6,000 soldiers may be defrayed. But Gilbert's associates cared nothing for fish and everything for gold. He went to the West Indies, lost a ship, and returned without a fortune. Next year he was forbidden to repeat the experiment. The project then languished until the fatal voyage of 1583, when Gilbert set sail with 6 vessels, intending to occupy Newfoundland as the base from which to colonize southwards until an armed New England should meet and beat New Spain. How vast his scheme! How pitiful its execution! And yet how immeasurably beyond his wildest dreams the actual development today! Gilbert was not a sea dog, but a soldier with an uncanny reputation for being a regular Jonah, who had no good hap at sea. He was also passionately self-willed, and Elizabeth had doubts about the propriety of backing him. But she sent him a gilt anchor by way of good luck, and off he went in June, financed chiefly by Raleigh, whose name was given to the flagship. Gilbert's adventure never got beyond its base in Newfoundland. His ship, the Delight, was wrecked. The crew of the Raleigh mutinied and ran her home to England. The other 4 vessels held on. But the men, for the most part, were neither good soldiers, good sailors, nor yet good colonists, but ne'er-do-wells and desperadoes. By September the expedition was returning broken down. Gilbert, furious at the sailors' hints that he was just a little sea-shy, would persist in sticking to the Lilliputian 10-ton Squirrel, which was woefully top-hampered with guns and stores. Before leaving Newfoundland he was implored to abandon her and bring her crew aboard a bigger craft. But no, do not fear, he answered, we are as near to heaven by sea as land. One wild night off the Azores the Squirrel foundered with all hands. Amadas and Barlow sailed in 1584. Prospecting for Sir Walter Raleigh, they discovered several harbors in North Carolina, then part of the vast plantation of Virginia. Roanoke Island, Pamlico, and Albemarle Sounds, as well as the intervening waters, were all explored with enthusiastic thoroughness and zeal. Barlow, a skipper who was handy with his pen, described the scent of that fragrant summer land in terms which attracted the attention of Bacon at the time and of Dryden a century later. The royal charter authorizing Raleigh to take what he could find in this strange land had a clause granting his prospective colonists all the privileges of free denizens and persons native of England in such ample manner as if they were born and personally resident in our said realm of England. Next year Sir Richard Grenville, who was Raleigh's cousin, convoyed out to Roanoke the little colony which Ralph Lane governed, and which, as we have seen in an earlier chapter, Drake took home discomfited in 1586. There might have been a story to tell of successful colonization instead of failure, if Drake had kept away from Roanoke that year, or if he had tarried a few days longer. For no sooner had the colony departed in Drake's vessels than a ship sent out by Sir Walter Raleigh, freighted with all manner of things in most plentiful manner, arrived at Roanoke. and after some time spent in seeking our colony up in the country, and not finding them, returned with all the aforesaid provision into England. About a fortnight later Sir Richard Grenville himself arrived with 3 ships. Not wishing to lose possession of the country where he had planted a colony the year before, he landed 15 men in the Isle of Roanoke, furnished plentifully with all manner of provision for 2 years, and so departed for England. Grenville unfortunately had burnt an Indian town and all its standing corn, because the Indians had stolen a silver cup. Lane, too, had been severe in dealing with the natives, and they had turned from friends to foes. These and other facts were carefully recorded on the spot by the official chronicler, Thomas Hariot, better known as a mathematician. Among the captains who had come out under Grenville in 1585 was Thomas Cavendish, a young and daring gentleman adventurer, greatly distinguished as such even in that adventurous age, and the second English leader to circumnavigate the globe. When Drake was taking Lane's men home in June 1586, Cavendish was making the final preparations for a 2-year voyage. He sailed mostly along the route marked out by Drake, and many of his adventures were of much the same kind. His prime object was to make the voyage pay a handsome dividend. But he did notable service in clipping the wings of Spain. He raided the shipping off Chile and Peru, took the Spanish flagship, the famous Santa Ana, off the coast of California, and on his return home in 1588 had the satisfaction of reporting, "I burned and sank 19 sail of ships, both small and great, and all the villages and towns that ever I landed at I burned and spoiled." While Cavendish was preying on Spanish treasure in America, and Drake was singeing the King of Spain's beard in Europe, Raleigh still pursued his colonizing plans. In 1587 John White and 12 associates received incorporation as the governor and assistants of the city of Raleigh in Virginia. The fortunes of this ambitious city were not unlike those of many another boomed and busted city of much more recent date. No time was lost in beginning. 3 ships arrived at Roanoke on the 22nd of July, 1587. Every effort was made to find the 15 men left behind the year before by Grenville to hold possession for the Queen. Mounds of earth, which may even now be traced, so piously have their last remains been cared for, mark the site of the fort. From natives of Croatoan Island the newcomers learned that Grenville's men had been murdered by hostile Indians. One native friend was found in Manteo, a chief whom Barlow had taken to England and Grenville had brought back. Manteo was now living with his own tribe of sea-coast Indians on Croatoan Islands. But the mischief between red and white had been begun, and though Manteo had been baptized and was recognized as the Lord of Roanoke, the races were becoming fatally estranged. After a month Governor White went home for more men and supplies, leaving most of the colonists at Roanoke. He found Elizabeth, Raleigh, and the rest all working to meet the great Armada. Yet even during the following year, the momentous year of 1588, Raleigh managed to spare 2 pinnaces with 15 colonists aboard, well provided with all that was most needed. A Spanish squadron, however, forced both pinnaces to run back for their lives. After this frustrated attempt 2 more years passed before White could again sail for Virginia. In August 1590 his trumpeter sounded all the old familiar English calls as he approached the little fort. No answer came. The colony was lost forever. White had arranged that if the colonists should be obliged to move away they should carve the name of the new settlement on the fort or surrounding trees, and if there was either danger or distress they should cut a cross above. The one word Croatoan was all White ever found. There was no cross. White's beloved colony, White's favorite daughter and her little girl, were perhaps in hiding. But supplies were running short. White was a mere passenger on board the ship that brought him, and the crew were getting impatient, so impatient for refreshment and a Spanish prize that they sailed past Croatoan, refusing to stop a single hour. Perhaps White learnt more than is recorded, and was satisfied that all the colonists were dead. Perhaps not. Nobody knows. Only a wandering tradition comes out of that impenetrable mystery and circles round the not impossible romance of young Virginia Dare. Her father was one of White's 12 assistants. Her mother, Eleanor, was White's daughter. Virginia herself, the first of all true native-born Americans, was born on the 18th of August, 1587. Perhaps Manteo, Lord of Roanoke, saved the whole family, whose name has been commemorated by that of the North Carolina county of Dare. Perhaps Virginia Dare alone survived to be an Indian queen about the time the first permanent Anglo-American colony was founded in 1607, 20 years after her birth. Who knows? These 20 sundering years from the end of this abortive colony in 1587 to the beginning of the first permanent colony in 1607 constitute a period that saw the close of one age and the opening of another in every relation of Anglo-American affairs. Nor was it only in Anglo-American affairs that change was rife. The Honorable East India Company entered upon its wonderful career. Shakespeare began to write his immortal plays. The chosen translators began their work on the authorized version of the English Bible. The Puritans were becoming a force within the body politic as well as in religion. Ulster was planted with Englishmen and Lowland Scots. In the midst of all these changes, the great Queen, grown old and very lonely, died in 1603. And with her ended the glorious Tudor dynasty of England. James, pusillanimous and pedantic son of Darnley and Mary Queen of Scots, ascended the throne as the first of the sinister Stuarts, and truckling to vindictive Spain, threw Raleigh into prison under suspended sentence of death. There was a break of no less than 15 years in English efforts to colonize America. Nothing was tried between the last attempt at Roanoke in 1587 and the first attempt in Massachusetts in 1602, when 32 people sailed from England with Bartholomew Gosnold, formerly a skipper in Raleigh's employ. Gosnold made straight for the coast of Maine, which he sighted in May. He then coasted south to Cape Cod. Continuing south, he entered Buzzard's Bay, where he landed on Cuttyhunk Island. Here, on a little island in a lake, an island within an island, he built a fort round which the colony was expected to grow. But supplies began to run out. There was bad blood over the proper division of what remained. The would-be colonists could not agree with those who had no intention of staying behind. The result was that the entire project had to be given up. Gosnold sailed home with the whole disgusted crew and a cargo of sassafras and cedar. Such was the first prospecting ever done for what is now New England. The following year, 1603, just after the death of Queen Elizabeth, some merchant venturers of Bristol sent out 2 vessels under Martin Pring. Like Gosnold, Pring first made the coast of Maine and then felt his way south. Unlike Gosnold, however, he bore into the great Gulf of Massachusetts Bay, where he took in a cargo of sassafras at Plymouth Harbor. But that was all the prospecting done this time. There was no attempt at colonizing. 2 years later another prospector was sent out by a more important company. The Earl of Southampton and Sir Ferdinando Gorges were the chief promoters of this enterprise. Gorges, as Lord Proprietary of the province of Maine, is a well-known character in the subsequent history of New England. Lord Southampton, as Shakespeare's only patron and greatest personal friend, is forever famous through the world. The chief prospector chosen by the company was George Weymouth, who landed on the coast of Maine, explored a little of the surrounding country, kidnapped 5 Indians, and returned to England with a glowing account of what he had seen. The cumulative effect of the 3 expeditions of Gosnold, Pring, and Weymouth was a revival of interest in colonization. Prominent men soon got together and formed 2 companies, which were formally chartered by King James on the 10th of April, 1606. The first, or southern colony, which came to be known as the London Company because most of its members lived there, was authorized to make its first plantation at any place upon the coast of Virginia or America between the 4° and 1° of latitude. The northern or second colony, afterwards called the Plymouth Company, was authorized to settle any place between 38° and 45° north, thus overlapping both the first company to the south and the French to the north. In the summer of the same year, 1606, Henry Challens took 2 ships of the Plymouth Company round by the West Indies, where he was caught in a fog by the Spaniards. Later in the season Pring went out and explored North Virginia. In May 1607, 120 men under George Popham started to colonize this North Virginia. In August they landed in Maine at the mouth of the Kennebec, where they built a fort, some houses, and a pinnace. Finding themselves short of provisions, 2/3 of their number returned to England late in the same year. The remaining third passed a terrible winter. Popham died, and Raleigh Gilbert succeeded him as governor. When spring came, all the survivors of the colony sailed home in the pinnace they had built, and the enterprise was abandoned. The reports of the colonists after their winter in Maine were to the effect that the second, or northern colony, was not habitable for Englishmen. In the meantime the permanent foundation of the first, or southern colony, the real Virginia, was well under way. The same number of intending emigrants went out, 120, on the 26th of April, 1607. About 4 o'clock in the morning we descried the land of Virginia. The same day we entered into the Bay of Chesapeake. Thus begins the tale of Captain John Smith, of the founding of Jamestown, and of a permanent Virginia, the first of the future United States. Now that we have seen one spot in vast America really become the promise of the English nation, which Raleigh had longed for, we must return once more to Raleigh himself. As, mocked by his tantalizing vision, he looked out on a changing world from his secular Mount Pisgah in the prison Tower of London. By this time he had felt both extremes of fortune to the full. During the travesty of justice at his trial, the Attorney General, having no sound argument, covered him with slanderous abuse. These are 3 of the false accusations on which he was condemned to death: viperous traitor, damnable atheist, and spider of hell. Hawkins, Drake, Frobisher, and Grenville, all were dead. So Raleigh, last of the great Elizabethan lions, was caged and baited for the sport of Spain. 6 of his 12 years of imprisonment were lightened by the companionship of his wife, Elizabeth Throgmorton, most beautiful of all the late Queen's maids of honor. Another solace was the history of the world, the writing of which set his mind free to wander forth at will, although his body stayed behind the bars. But the contrast was too poignant not to wring this cry of anguish from his preface. Yet when we once come in sight of the port of death, to which all winds drive us, and when by letting fall that fatal anchor which can never be weighed again, the navigation of this life takes end, then it is, I say, that our own cogitations, those sad and severe cogitations formerly beaten from us by our health and felicity, return again, and pay us to the uttermost for all the pleasing passages of our life past. At length, in the spring of 1616, Raleigh was released, though still unpardoned. He and his devoted wife immediately put all that remained of their fortune into a new venture. 20 years before this he thought he could make discovery of the mighty, rich, and beautiful empire of Guiana, and of that great and golden city which the Spaniards called El Dorado and the natives call Manoa. Now he would go back to find the El Dorado of his dreams, somewhere inland, that mysterious Manoa, among those southern mountains of bright stones which lay behind the Spanish Main. The King's cupidity was roused, and so in 1617 Raleigh was commissioned as the admiral of 14 sail. In November he arrived off the coast that guarded all the fabled wealth still lying undiscovered in the far recesses of the Orinocan wilds. Guiana, Manoa, El Dorado, the inland voices called him on. But Spaniards barred the way, and Raleigh, defying the instructions of the King, attacked them. The English force was far too weak, and disaster followed. Raleigh's son and heir was killed, and his lieutenant committed suicide. His men began to mutiny. Spanish troops and ships came closing in, and the forlorn remnant of the expedition on which such hopes were built went straggling home to England. There Raleigh was arrested and sent to the block on the 29th of October, 1618. He had played the great game of life and death and lost it. When he mounted the scaffold he asked to see the axe. Feeling the edge, he smiled and said, "'Tis a sharp medicine, but a cure for all diseases." Then he bared his neck and died like one who had served the great Queen as her captain of the guard. End of chapter 11.